Today, our webinar speaker today is Paul Timm. Paul is the Director of Education Safety at Allegion. He is a board-certified physical security professional and the author of School Security: How to Build and Strengthen a School Safety Program. He was named one of the most influential people in security in 2020 by Security Magazine. In addition to conducting numerous vulnerability assessments and his frequent keynote addresses, Paul is an experienced school crisis assistant team volunteer through the National Organization for Victims Assistance. He serves on the Campus Safety Conferences Advisory Board, the Advisory Council for the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, the ASIS International School Safety and Security Council, and the Illinois Association of School Business Officials Risk Management Committee. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today and providing this valuable information. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tony. I'm so glad to be here, and it's an honor. So thanks to you. Thanks to Lisa, the whole team at Lightspeed, and of course, Safe and Sound Schools. I'm not going to say much more than what Tony said because it was very gracious, but I do want to begin with a story. And that story comes from the city of Chicago, actually one of the suburbs. A couple of years ago in the month of March, I was having lunch on a day that was about 32 degrees and had precipitation. And if you know anything about Chicago, it was at 32 degrees, neither rain nor snow. It's actually what we call a wintry mix. Awful. And anyway, I was having lunch indoors with a good friend of mine whose name is Joe, and Joe is an accountant. And as soon as I tell you that Joe is an accountant, automatically you think certain things about him, and you are correct. But anyway, Joe and I had a really nice lunch, and it was time to leave, and Joe headed out to his car in that part of the lot. He was kind of hurrying so as to not get all wet. And I headed to my car in that part of the lot. And I got in, started it up, when in my peripheral vision, I noticed some fast movement from the area that Joe had been going toward. And I looked over, and Joe was actually now running toward me across the parking lot, getting wet. And I thought, well, he must have forgotten to tell me something very important. So I rolled down the window on the passenger side and I said, "What is it, Joe?" And it sort of startled him, and he looked and he said, "Oh, no, I'm not coming in to talk with you. I thought I parked over there, but I really parked over here." Now, it struck me as very humorous because Joe, as an accountant, has everything in his life in order. And for him to have spaced where his car is in the parking lot was just out of character. So I chuckled, waved, rolled up the window, and was just changing the station on the radio when I noticed some more movement in my peripheral vision. I looked over, and now I could see Joe is running to the area he had just come from, and he's got his fob and he's trying to get his lights to flash. He cannot find his car, and he is now very wet. And so at this point, and I'm sorry to admit it, but I was openly laughing at my friend, not so much because he was soaking wet, but because it was so out of character for Joe and his orderly personality to not be able to find his car. Anyway, I put my car in drive, and I was about, I don't know, 10, 20 feet out of my space when it dawned on me, I drove Joe to lunch. Yeah, he doesn't have a car in the lot at all, and the real knucklehead in the story is me. And why do I share anything like that? Because as we talk about school safety, a lot of times what we really want to talk about is how to change that culture from one that has kind of a Mayberry and nothing ever goes wrong, and from old Andy Griffith days to a much more see something, say something, a heightened awareness mentality. Because whether we're an accountant who generally has everything perfectly ordered, or a security guy who's supposed to have a radar for these things, sometimes we let our awareness levels drop. So I want to begin by asking you to complete this pop quiz. You don't have to answer. If you want to throw things in the chat, that's fine. But as you are part of this webinar, and the specific place that you are, whether home office or maybe you're back in the office, or maybe you're taking this from someone else's location, where now is the closest defibrillator to you? If you're in your home, you might say, well, I just don't have one in my home. So now then, think if you were in the office, if you were at a place where you spend a lot of your time, where is the closest defibrillator to where your workspace is? I find that a lot of people just haven't thought about it. It becomes window dressing. And then when push comes to shove and we actually really need a defibrillator, even those who are trained, certified in first aid, CPR, and AED are not ready to help because they've let their awareness level drop. Second question, from the place that you, again, not your home, but you would be in the office or spending most of your time in an industrial institutional type, how many marked egress paths are there? Meaning you know there's an exit sign, and maybe there's not one in your office to get out, of course, but maybe from the main entry part of your office or school or college building that you're in, how many marked egress paths are there? I'm based in Chicago, where 68 years ago, Our Lady of the Angels Catholic School burned to the ground and almost 100 people died. And after that, we got very, very excellent with fire prevention and fire protection. And the NFPA is one of those entities that came out of that situation. And we are now required by code to have fire alarm systems and do fire drills and have facilities that are built of fire retardant materials. And because we've gone down that road, there hasn't been one student who has died in a school-related fire since across America. Now, sometimes people say, but that's because fires aren't really a threat anymore, but you could not be more inaccurate in making that statement, because holding fairly steady, there are about 3,000 fires in educational institutions across America every calendar year. We haven't had any deaths. We have had burns, severe injuries, smoke inhalation, but no deaths, because we've been very excellent to make sure that we're complying with codes that we would never want to compromise. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Number three, from where you sit in your office or your place of work, the place of learning, can you see a posted evacuation map? And if you can see a posted evacuation map, or maybe you can't, it's not in your office, but you know there's one around the corner, what kinds of information would you find on that map? Would you find a primary egress route, a secondary egress route, locations of defibrillators, trauma kits, places we will go to shelter if there's severe weather? I want you to think about that. Next question. If the fire alarm sounded right now in the place where you work or are, where would you go? And what we find is generally people follow everybody else. Or if you're in a place that you're sort of familiar with, that you've driven to, you're going to head out the exit that leads you most quickly to your vehicle, where you would feel most comfortable. Unfortunately, for many of us, that means going right out the main entry and maybe being in the way as emergency responders are trying to arrive and positively affect the situation. We need to know where our designated rally areas are. And then finally, and again, not your home, but your office or where you would be spending your time, does your room have a wired telephone? Now, I know you have your smartphone, good for you. But that phone, if there's a big incident and capacity has been reached cellular wise, may not work. Second of all, if Wi-Fi is lost, you may not have that capability. But a wired phone, unless of course it's voice over IP, a wired phone can be a real help. Now, let's say it's not an incident where cellular is going to be at capacity, but maybe you're in an area where you don't have good coverage, or let's face it, with your cell phone, you might not have really superintended the battery strength well enough. I want people to understand where a primary method of emergency communication would be, and let's not just assume that it's going to be our cellular phone. Okay, a couple things I want to talk about. This is my only concept slide, and then we're going to get to the three keys. But security is the protection of assets, and assets are like nouns. They're people, places, and things. If we in the educational environment had to vote to say which one of these three categories deserves top priority, hopefully we would all say people. And if that's the case, I'm just going to give you a nugget right off the bat here, and I'll return to it later. There are two areas that protect people the most. And while I hope you have video surveillance cameras and systems, that's not one of them. Generally, video surveillance is helping us mostly from a forensic standpoint, so we can look at things after the fact. The two areas that protect people the most are communication systems. If I can't get help when I need it, I'm really going to have Murphy's Law happen in my life. If I'm in a place where an emergency announcement has been made, but I can't hear it in that place, again, Murphy's Law is going to find me. Communication systems must be excellent. And of course, the other area is access control. Can we determine where people come onto our property, where they enter our building or buildings, and where then they're permitted to go once they're inside the building? Access control. Those two areas, if we only have $1 to spend and an hour to plan, are the two areas that we would want to focus on first to protect people. Okay, the first key that I want to share with you is collaboration. And I just want to let you know this. It's difficult to make sure that we have effective safety plans and programs if we don't have support all the way at the top. So a top-down commitment becomes very, very important. And whether you're in a top position or somewhere a little bit further down, your example is very important. We're not going to be like a culture that's used to trading security for convenience. We're not. We're going to wear our ID on the lanyard. We are going to not prop doors open. We're going to follow the safety practices that have been and that we've been instructed in. And so please do not underestimate the power of your example. I will tell you this, it may not feel powerful to follow our safety practices, but when you don't, that's making a big impact. Other eyes are going to see it's not that important to you. And that's when we really have a culture shift that we don't want. Documentation, very important. If you find issues that need to be addressed, what we're not going to do is say, oh yeah, I've already reported that to facilities, or I've already told so-and-so about that. In fact, I've told them a number of times. Nope. We're going to document it to make sure that we've demonstrated that we've taken reasonable efforts to address the vulnerability that we've encountered. NIMS is the National Incident Management System. You see it here on your left, and it's really just sort of a work breakdown structure. All came into place after 9/11 to make sure that emergencies and incidents were being addressed the same way, whether police, fire, school administrators, whatever it might be. Now, what I find is a lot of schools say, well, I know what the incident management system is and the incident command system, and we're just not able to do it, especially before school hours or after school hours. So I commend you a tool on your right called the Staff Skills Survey and Inventory. And I want to challenge you, don't do this right now because it disrupts my rhythm, but I want to challenge you to go to a search engine, put in Staff Skills Survey and Inventory, download it, and then distribute it to all of your stakeholders, your key stakeholders. Yep, employees, of course, maybe volunteers, depending on what kind of institution you're in. Maybe you have employees, but you also have coaches who come to help out with athletic teams. Anybody who might be in a place of need during an incident, we want this information from. And basically, we're just asking in this survey, and it takes just moments to complete. Are you currently certified in first aid, CPR, and AED? You either check yes or you leave it blank. Do you speak more than just English as a language? I'm not going to go through all these. Do you keep emergency supplies in your vehicle? What kind of supplies? And what we find is we become so much more prepared for emergencies immediately Plus, we're giving this information back to you or the school or whoever is going to oversee this project. And all of a sudden, we understand our capabilities a lot better than we may have before. And as we're looking at who might take care of operations or logistics or whatever it might be, we now can plug somebody in, or we can plug somebody in to be a backup, or a backup for the backup. So we have good redundancy in our preparedness. Accountability. Let's hold one another accountable. You can do that with a smile. The wagon wine technique has not been very successful for us, but we can give an attagirl or an attaboy when somebody is getting with the program. In fact, if somebody changes behavior and it makes a significant impact, we can reward them with a coffee shop gift card. Let's be creative. We've got Halloween coming up. Take the candies that your kids don't like, give them to people who are doing the right thing to reinforce behaviors. Accountability and practices is very important. And then mass notification. We're in the debate right now. Should students be allowed to have cellular phones or not? And in what capacity and to what extent can they use those cell phones? But I want to tell you this. Students are, even going all the way into middle school, far more likely to have the iPhone 16 than you are. And students, by the time we're in high school, they're leaving the property for vocational purposes, athletic events. That lifeline of communications can be very important between parents and students, between school and students for mass notification. Listen, you get to determine what your practices are, and I don't have a magic wand for that, but I do have a magic formula, and it goes like this. Collaboration, let's get our stakeholders together, plus consensus. That's as close as we can get to a magic formula. But mass notification is one of those things we want to make sure we're covering, especially if you're a school that maybe around down the block and around the corner, there's another school. You're a public school, they're a private school. You're a private school, but you've got a community college just less than a mile away. We want to make sure that we're on one another's mass notification systems. We really have done a good job acquiring, implementing, but then not extending it to the broader community. Let's make sure that we do that. Okay, the second key that I want to bring to you today is awareness. And of course, I shared the story about my friend Joe and I in the parking lot earlier. I shared it as well, the pop quiz, and all of this information I'm considering to be train the trainer. Take it, use it back at the ranch to make sure that your culture is becoming a higher awareness culture. But one of the things that I really like is a briefing. And I like a briefing at every one of the staff meetings. You say, well, Paul, the staff meetings, they're happening monthly, sometimes even more. That's fine. 2 or 3 minutes of every staff meeting to bring in some kind of safety instruction, some kind of safety quiz, some kind of safety reminder will help change the culture. And I want to show you one right now. If it's not the pop quiz, the story I shared earlier, how about a photo like this? I'm going to give you just a second to look at the photo, and now I'm going to remove it from the screen, and I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box, don't describe the whole scene, but tell me just one thing that you saw in that scene. Be one word. Don't tell me, I saw this and that, and the number was, well, I don't want to go that far. Just what did we see in that scene? And I'm going to just give you a moment to respond in the chat and look at what we've got here. Okay. Remember, it's in the chat box that we'll put this. It's all taking place in a parking lot. And in that parking lot, we saw vehicles. Thank you. Vegetation, pothole. Okay, very good. All right, now let's drill down a little bit more. And in your chat box, help me with this. How many vehicles total are in that scene? Go ahead and enter a number. How many vehicles total? Okay, we've got somebody who guessed 6. That's incorrect. Let's go a little further. Okay, and I see that we're answering some of this in Q&A, so let me go a little bit further. There's some people who said 5, 6. You know, I'm from Chicago, so you can vote more than once here. Okay, all right, listen. The number of vehicles in that scene is not between 0 and 10, where we're all looking at the same scene. Let me ask one more question before we move on. Please, give me a make and model of any of the vehicles in the foreground. A make and model of any of the vehicles. And some of you are indicating that the chat box has been disabled. My apologies on that. Let's then put it right in the Q&A section. How many, give me a make and model of any of the vehicles in the foreground. Okay. And Robert, I see that you've said Honda/Dodge. I'd like make and model if we can stretch a little bit further. Thank you, Gloria and Rishi, for letting us know the chat box was disabled. We're going to do this now through the Q&A box. It's not easy, is it? Let me go back to the scene and I'm going to show you this. Ready? There are 5 in our lot, but there are dozens of vehicles in the lot behind ours. And some of the things that were not mentioned is a chain link fence. Can you see it now that we're actually looking? How about the light standard in the parking lot behind ours? Now that I'm asking about make and model, can you identify at least the vehicle that's closest to us in this scene? Thank you. I see the Toyota Camry. Yep, that's right. Listen, why do we do a situation like this? Because, please work with me. I know this doesn't apply to you, but I want you to think about people who you work with. We have people who are at our institutions and in our agencies and schools have for the better part of their entire career, they're parked in exactly the same space. Well, except for one day when they got there and somebody else had taken that space and they were then a little bit grouchy the rest of the day. And they returned earlier the next day to get it back. And what we do is we fall into a routine. We're looking down, it's the same number of steps to the same door. We wouldn't notice if skyrockets were going off right next to us. So how do we take a culture that's given to routine and help make them a better part of our safety program? And I maintain that a photo like this would be a really great way of doing that. I notice there was nothing scary in the photo. I don't want to scare people in the submission. I want to equip them. I want to educate them. And not only can we do a photo like that, if you put awareness video into a search engine, and again, please do it at a different time, you'll find dozens of videos that come up, most of which are less than 90 seconds, which help us tell us to look for things and then show maybe something different in the background that we'll miss if we're not looking for that. I like videos. I like photos. I like trivia contests. And I'm going to give one to you right now. We're going to return to the Q&A. Thank you for your patience as we work through the technology on this. But please, if you like trivia at all, feel free to guess. I live in the state of Illinois, and the National Weather Service tracks the number of tornadoes that every state in the union gets. They track this over a 10-year period and boil it down and tell us how many per year we should expect to get in our states. So over a 12-month period, on average, how many tornadoes do you think the state of Illinois gets? Go ahead and plug that in. Punch in your answer. I won't call you out by name unless you get it right on the head. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But how many tornadoes do you think the state of Illinois gets each calendar year? Moving through, it's more than a couple. Now, Robert is very close. I am calling you out because you're very close. He's guessed 50. And the answer, actually, Glenn got it right on the nose, is 54. When I first saw that statistic, I was shocked. I live in Illinois. I've lived in Illinois my whole life. 54 tornadoes seems like a lot to get every single calendar year. Let me go a little further. Illinois is not the state in the union that gets the most tornadoes. Which state do you think that gets the most tornadoes? Which state? Let's punch that right into the Q&A. You're doing great. It's not Oklahoma, and and it's not Kansas. And even though we've seen Gone with the Wind and Anyway, it's not. It's not either of those. It's not Iowa, Florida, and Kenton got it. It is Texas. And I want you to think about land mass of Texas. Texas gets 155 tornadoes every calendar year. It's unbelievable to me. They lead the U.S. In JIC that you put Texas in as well. So I give props to you. Last trivia question. The National Weather Service has been able to determine that 1 month in the calendar year is more likely to get tornadoes coast to coast than any other month. What's the most active tornado month in the calendar year? What would your guess be? I'm going to look through. Very close, Johnny. And here's Robert, who nailed it. If this was a radio program, he would be caller of the show. May is the most active tornado month. So if we were having a trivia contest, or a briefing about tornadoes and asking people the difference between a warning and a watch, we probably wouldn't do it in the month of October with November and December coming up. We would probably do it in the month of March with April and May coming up. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about, and I'll add a few other briefings as we move through today. What can we do? What can we do to equip and educate and change the culture? Positive incentives I've talked about already. Let's just slap a coffee shop gift card on somebody who's really changed their behavior for the better. Staff development. I like to talk with people about security, not practices, but products and systems that we have in place. Because we've, in the past, waited till everybody was gone over a break. We've installed more cameras. We've added to our electronic access control program, but we didn't really educate them about that. And as a result, I can oftentimes follow a staff member who has a credential to get into the building as a tailgater, and maybe they didn't even know it. Maybe I was several paces, but I know that door is going to take 5 to 7 seconds before it closes and latches. And sometimes we encounter doors that don't latch, makes our job even easier. But I'll grab that door before it latches. I'll watch the person go down the hallway and out of view, and then I'll step into the building, and it's like we don't even have value to our electronic access system. We should let people know. We should educate them. Your credentials for you and you only. Don't let somebody follow you in the building. Pause for a couple moments before proceeding to make sure the door closes and latches. If somebody tries to follow you in the building, please direct them to the main entry. If they followed you in before you knew what was happening, please have them follow visitor management practices. If you're shy, call somebody from the building and have them exact visitor management practices. We can educate people. They should know how many cameras we have in the building as an employee. They should know where those cameras are. They should know that we're storing for at least 30 days. Let's educate people. The more information and education they get, the more likely they are to make a personal investment in our safety program. And of course, see something, say something. I want to remind everybody that the Department of Homeland Security, which you can visit their website anytime you'd like after this webinar, has free posters like you see here on your right, clip art pieces you can use in social media and electronically, all kinds of information to help remind people that we're safer when we report things that we think are not right. Let me move on. This is the third key to effective school security, and it's youth involvement. I really should expand it beyond just youth involvement. It's youth and early adopter involvement. And as I go further, I want to maybe just explain to you, it might be youth, early adopter, and adopter involvement. So let me just say this. First of all, students, younger people in general, are ahead of us in technology and in having a pulse for what's really happening around and not just in, but around our educational institutions. We have to engage them and include them in our safety program. Now, I don't include students who are pre-K through fifth, although I'm starting to waffle on fifth, but I do include students 6th grade and above. again, they're going to be able to help us out. They know where vulnerabilities are. And let me just go back to the briefings for a moment. How about giving a student a couple weeks notice and asking them in 3 minutes to explain something about a social media platform? For example, they could stand up and tell people why they like Snapchat and explain some of the features of Snapchat, and maybe say, be careful if you have people you care about who are using Snap Maps, because of the location settings can identify exactly where you are. We can change the culture. You know, my kids have really helped me, and they're all adults, but my oldest son told me at least 15 years ago, he said, Dad, we are the first generation in the history of mankind, and he let the ellipsis dangle there for just a moment, that is consistently bringing vital information to the generations above us. And it's true. I definitely did not teach my grandparents much at all. I didn't teach my parents much. It's not the way it worked. We didn't have the access to information that we do today. And I'm not saying that we should let students lead the program, although I would like to talk about that. But I am talking about making sure that they're included in the program. And maybe sometimes that's going to require a little bit of humbling on our parts. Now, I talked about social media, so let's look at some statistics here. The average person checks their phone 96 times a day. It's unfathomable, and I think that number is a little bit low for reality. Smartphone use is involved in 26% of car accidents in America. I believe that's only the honest people being honest. The average internet user is online for 43% of their waking life. You know what? We'd like to say, woof, I feel bad for people like that, but we have to admit that even we know what reels are, and the algorithm has figured us out to the point where we spend more time than we'd like just on reels, never mind the scores, never mind whatever else it might be, the videos and photos and Instagram and on and on and on. TikTok. Speaking of TikTok, 37% of TikTok users were aged between 18 and 24. My universities and colleges on this call are not surprised at all. Is the higher percentage for younger? I think those who are middle school and high school entities on this webinar would say, unfortunately, that's probably the case. I don't want to spend a whole lot more time because I don't think the sky is falling. I just think this. As somebody who may not be naturally an early adopter, I want to learn. I want to know a little bit more. You know, the rage today and the talk today is about artificial intelligence, and that makes some of us very concerned. I had a colleague not too long ago say, oh, that version of GBT that we have access to, I'm not going to use that for the project that we're on. I'd rather use my brain. And I remember thinking, it feels self-indicting. I think to engage our brain in learning something new is actually where we're going to be using our brain. I'm not telling you you have to be a master at AI. I am telling you this, and I'm going to bring it with an analogy. When I was growing up, my parents had us take swimming lessons, my sisters and I. And my parents knew how to swim, so they knew how vital it was that we would learn how to swim. And from an early age, we learned. And I remember being at the public pool in summers, and you know, you're not using a lot of those strokes, but you're comfortable in the pool. I also remember noticing that my mom never swam with us. Why not? Well, she didn't want to get her hair wet. She didn't want to be in the middle of all of the fray with the splashing and yelling. But my mom also knew what was happening in the pool. Even though she was in the shade, even though she had an Agatha Christie novel, if something had happened to me or one of my sisters, even if there were lifeguards, and there were, my mom would have been first on the scene, and all 5'3" of her would have been more than able to help us in those situations because she cared so much about us and she knew how to swim. Now, listen, I want you to think about social media. If you're not an early adopter, if you're not even an adopter like that, please learn how to swim. And as you learn how to swim, you're going to come across things that help the people who you care about, who are in the deep end that you may never enter into. It's time to help them. Explain to them on Instagram the difference between a public profile and a private profile and why we would want to choose private. Explain to them the concerns we have about snap maps. Explain to them on Facebook why a decade or more ago you should have signed up and security settings for multi-factor authentication so that you wouldn't be hacked. Listen, I don't have time to go through all of these, but I'm telling you, now is the time to make sure we're familiar with basic safety features so we can help the people who we care about. There's plenty of other ways to involve students, but I'm going to move on to the two parts I said are very vital to protecting people. And I want to start with access control. I'll follow up with communications, and then we'll follow up with emergency preparedness, resources, and questions. I also want to remind you, because the chat box is now working again and people are bringing comments. Thank you very much for being patient with me. And I want to let you know that if you do have questions about things I'm saying, please drop them right in the Q&A. I'm interruptible, and we'll also have a little bit of time afterward that we can tackle those questions. Access control. I was just meeting with a school district today, and they were saying, Paul, we'd like to move from our fobs to maybe cards. What do you think about that? And I said, I think it's a good idea, but soon enough, we're going to be moving to our phone being the credential to get in. And I thought it was going to be through Bluetooth. It looks more and more like it's going to be through NFC, near field communications. And this phone will then become our credential. We're far less likely to lose it. We're not going to let other people borrow it. And occasionally there are people who say, well, Paul, the union will say, we don't have to get the app on our phone. Or there may even be people in our building who don't have smartphones. And so what do we know about those people who don't have smartphones? Well, first of all, they're happier than us. And second of all, their card or fob will still continue to work. And when they go home, they'll probably still keep it in the same drawer where they keep their 8-track tapes, because those work too. And my point about it is this: we don't want to be afraid about moving to something that's more safe, something that's more advanced. And electronic access is where we're going to find that first. Secured vestibule, I've got a photo I want to show you about that. I go into a lot of schools and even universities where they say they've got a secured vestibule up front where it's maybe not as secure as you think. We'll look at a photo about that a little bit later. A lot of people, since the awful incident in Nashville with the Covenant School, have made sure that their tempered glass is reinforced with some kind of film, or maybe replaced with a laminated glass. And I like that. I also want to draw your attention to our interior panes of glass or view panels. Yesterday at the Illinois School Safety Conference, we had Missy Dodds. She was a teacher at the Red Lake School. Her door was closed and locked when the bad guy got there. He shot the lock and it held. He then noticed there was a view panel of tempered glass next to the door, and she said she remembers him having an aha moment where he then shoots the glass, it falls, turns into beads, and enters the classroom where he commits all of the carnage. It's a terrible tragedy that occurred, one that might have been prevented with a reinforced glass. It would have at least provided more delay. Visitor management software. I know many of you have it, and I'm glad for you. But in general, it spits out a sticker, which does not stick here and can't be used on fabrics like leather, silk, suede, satin, fleece, linen, and velour. Let's leave the backing on the sticker and put it in a badge holder that hangs on a colored breakaway lanyard. Classroom security, I'm going to get to in just a moment. Let me show you some photos. And then let me be mindful of time here. On the left, we've got a school that has electronic access. You can see the reader right on the door, but the door is propped. It's propped because this door is used to go to what's called a mobile or portable or a trailer, whatever you would call those ancillary, a learning cottage. And a student did not want other students to get locked out after the door had secured after passing period. Dropped a wood wedge. Sometimes an administrator will say, well, Paul, we have we have 50 exterior doors. We can't stop them all from being propped open. To which I generally respond, really, are all 50 being propped open? Or could it be that we could count on one hand how many are being propped open? Could it be that we already know which ones, that we already know why, and in many cases by whom? We can do better, and access control is one of those places we have to be. Here we have a secured vestibule on the right, but it's not really a secured vestibule because the design permits the window to open more than far enough for somebody to jump through, or at least threaten our administrative assistant. Now, we may not have to retrofit everything, but we could at least drop some kind of stopper in there. So now the window opens far enough for me to talk to you and you to talk with me, but not far enough for me to be threatened. On the left, we've got conjoined rooms, 2 classrooms connected by an interior door. And what we always tell people is this: please make sure that interior door and the hallway doors are closed and locked at all times. We do know that at Uvalde, that bad guy walked in there and then had access, walked into a classroom, had access to another classroom where there was no delay at all. In the middle one, we've got vehicles pulled up close to the sidewalk, but there's no concrete abutments. They can pull onto the sidewalk. They can pull right into the playgrounds and athletic fields. It should not be that way. On the right, same kind of way, we've got a bus lane marker. We allowed a parent to drive up and park part on the sidewalk to walk her child in. We should not be allowing things like that. This is a recess scene. If we had a little bit more time, I would invite you in the chat box to name the vulnerability. But there are 3 key vulnerabilities that I'm going to talk about here. First of all, the gate is open during recess. And that's chiefly because we allow students to be the first ones out. They're addressing the dogs that aren't leashed, the vagrants, the geese in mating season. Nope, we should go out first and secure the property. Number 2, where are the monitors? Well, they're in a recessed door area. This girl with the pink pants, she's going to walk about 6 more steps and be in the building, but the monitors are there. They should be in a perimeter around the kids. All the risk behind me, all of the kids in front of me. And then on the left, we see what I call Monty Python-ish shrubbery. That shrubbery, like I said, is right up against the building by that entrance she's going to, and it's almost double her height. Crime prevention through environmental design says no shrubbery taller than 3 feet, otherwise somebody can be concealed by it, and all tree limbs cleared at least 8 feet, so we have good lines of sight wherever there is an entry, a walkway, or a parking lot. This, in fact, is the way that we should be supervising recess. I might not have the person stand on an X like a lifeguard would at a pool, but I will have them stand in an area so we have a perimeter around the kids, and I will equip them with a 2-way radio, some kind of safety vest or armband that's reflective like this, and first aid supplies as well. In fact, if you throw on a whistle, you're going to be perfect. I'm going to move further away from vulnerabilities and before and after photos so I can just talk with you briefly about why we don't use any of these secondary locking devices or barricade devices. We don't use them because they all violate the tight pinching and grasping restriction for ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act laws. All of these require tight pinching and grasping. The lever on your door does not. The exit device on the exterior door does not. We can pretty much just fall into them and they're going to let us out. The National Fire Protection Association says 1 motion to egress, not 2. It says no prior knowledge needed in operating any of these devices that we have. All of these require prior knowledge. The magnet ruins the spring in the latch. When it's partially sprung, it's over time going to lose its ability to fully latch that door when we need it to. And all of these items, of course, can be used by the bad guy against us. If anyone doubts the things that I'm saying, ask your fire marshal or authority having jurisdiction to come in. And if they say, okay, yes, you can use them, have them put it in writing on their letterhead. They'll never take on the liability that they're okay with you taking on. Do not permit these devices. Okay, communications, I'm really going to kind of move through fast. And so I want to tell you just a couple things. All of our telephones should be labeled. At least let's program the speed dial locations and label them, knowing they go to the main office, they go to the nurse, they go to the public safety group, they go to the code that allows us to make a public address announcement. Our phones are underutilized. The features are underutilized. We can be better with what we're doing. Public address, does your public address system have exterior capabilities? If not, how are we notifying people outside the building? It has to be addressed. Two-way radios, I like more than the spoken word can tell, and I would require all administrators, administrative assistants, facilities personnel, and staff who monitor student movement to carry them. Here's a phone on the left, not programmed, not labeled. Here's an intercom call button on the right. We consider it antiquated in this school, so we just put something in front of it. But if we lose Wi-Fi and aren't able to get cell phone because of capacity issues, that hardwired system is still going to work. Let's make sure we maintain redundancy. On the left, we have an evacuation map that was done incorrectly. It looks like it was put together with crayons. On the right, we have a marked egress path, and we've blocked it. We just simply can't be this cavalier about our safety practices. Okay, a couple more slides, and then we take questions. In emergency preparedness, I want to make sure that you have not just the code-driven defibrillators, but also trauma kits. And in many cases, we're finding them to be code-driven now. And whether we use Stop the Bleed or Rescue in Color or whoever we use, they should be well marked, easily accessible, maybe in the very same place where we have the defibrillator, we have a cabinet for our trauma kit. All we know about these items is they're saving lives regularly. I want to move quickly to the stop and think drill. I know many of you may have active shooter drills or lockdown drills, but you're not doing them during arrival time, dismissal time, lunchtime, or any difficult time. So I commend to you the stop and think drill. Consider with me, it's arrival time. I'm just about to enter the building when I hear your attention, please, and we have to repeat that. Your attention, please. We are now going to have our stop and think drill. If an incident were occurring right now, what would your options be? And if I'm about to come in the building, I might say, I'd be safer going back to my car and driving off the property. Or maybe I'm close enough to the building that I say, I'm going to go in. My classroom is far down the hall, but I can go right into Miss Jones' classroom. And you see, the stop and think drill in a very short amount of time makes me much more spatially aware. And after a few moments, you basically say, your attention, please. The stop and think drill is now complete. If you have any questions or issues, please see Miss Gannon in the main office. Boom, there we go. School safety resources. The first one is the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. It's a non-for-profit that has put together guidelines for K through 12, many of which might apply to higher education, but those guidelines are free to download at that site. They have white papers that help, and in the guidelines, you'll find self-assessment checklists as well. The I Love You Guys Foundation, coming out of the Platte Canyon tragedy of Colorado, gives you free emergency protocols. In fact, they're called the Standard Response Protocol. What do we do for evacuation and what do we call it? What do we do for lockdown and what do we call it? All of that information is free at the I Love You Guys Foundation, iloveyouguys.org. Schoolsafety.gov is the federal repository for school security and emergency planning resources. It's the government website that came into existence after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas incident and provides you with tools and resources and access to grant funding. Lock Don't Block is a website put together by Allegion, Assa Abloy, and Dormakaba, the three biggest competitors who have said, wait a minute, let's make sure we're not compromising safety codes and ADA laws. Lock Don't Block will work you through that to make sure you're as secure as possible without adding more risks than you're trying to address. Safe and Sound Schools, a big partner of Lightspeed and also of Allegion, has so many resources. I couldn't begin to describe them all, but of course, came out of the Sandy Hook incident of 2012. And Alyssa Parker and Michelle Gay put together something that's a not-for-profit, very wonderful. I commend that website to you. REMS stands for Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools, and they have a great toolbox at that Department of Education website. The YouTube video is from the Secret Service, and it's called Averted School Shootings. They studied planned shootings that didn't happen because there was an intervention of some sort and came out with 10 commonalities, one of which is this: almost every one of those incidents were planned to coincide with an anniversary date or a year mark date. Year mark is the better term for things like April 20th, which was Columbine, or 9/11, or February the 14th, which was Marjory Stoneman Douglas. It's something to keep in mind. And then the last link is to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I showed you earlier the work breakdown structure for the Incident Command System. That's where you can go and get certified in what's called NIMS 100, the Incident Command System, at no cost. And I want to commend you to do that. In fact, I'm going to leave these up, and I'm going to invite Tony to come to help with any questions that we might have received as things were trucking along.
Thank you, Paul. Wonderful presentation. So many great resources and insights that you provided to us. There are a couple questions here that I wanted to pass along to you. One is, what do you see as the biggest misconceptions or misunderstandings when it comes to strengthening school security?
Well, I think the biggest mindset misconception is it'll never happen here, or everybody knows everybody, so just something like that would never happen here. Every place that we've had an incident had somebody who said the same thing. And while I don't want to go to a school, college, or university feeling nervous, I do want to go there being aware. And if I see something that would be of a concern at all, I want to report that immediately. So I think it starts, Tony, with the mindset. And then I think after that, we assume if we have security products and systems, they're just all going to be working perfectly. And I like to say this: an assessment helps test those things. And when I do an assessment, and I'm not selling my services at all, but I generally find products and systems that we thought were working that aren't. And what we should never let is the bad guy or the victim be the first one to test that. We should be testing them regularly to make sure everything is operating the way that we thought it should be.
Very good. Another question, you obviously will go in and take a look at what a school safety training and awareness program should look like. When you go and review existing protocols, what are some of the things that you're looking for first and foremost?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that people who are buy systems or have access to systems actually know how to use them or can access them. You know, Tony, there was one time I was a room of, I want to say, about 20 superintendents, and I said, could you raise your hand if you have the capability of bringing up your cameras on your smartphone? And about 18 of the 20 hands went up, and I said, good, because we're going to take a break right now. Could you raise your hand if we can all come over and look at your phone and you can show us some of those camera shots? And every hand but two went down. They had the capability, they had the features, but they weren't utilizing it, and they were not going to be able to utilize it in an emergency because they weren't keeping aware of and informed on how to use those features. So I like to ask people, we're in all these different places. Like, for example, we could pick up a phone, enter a code, and access the public address system. I say to a teacher, what is the code? Have you ever actually practiced doing that? And generally it's a no. So when I'm coming in, I just want to find out, are we using these systems effectively? I mean, think about mass notification where you specialize, Tony. The first time we do it should not be during the emergency. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for.
Very good. And this one may be putting your Allegion hat on, I'm not sure, but someone asked, what classroom door locks reinforcements do you recommend?
Well, let me just tell you this, both the Sandy Hook After Action Report and the Marjory Stoneman Douglas After Action Report specify that the bad guy has never breached a closed and locked classroom door. Now, the only exception we might find to that would be Red Lake, where but again, it was the lock that held. And sometimes people say, well, what was the brand of the lock? Is it the one that your company can? And I would tell you this: Dormakaba, ASA Abloy, and Allegion are going to say this: the commercial door lock that all of them make is more than good enough to provide the delay that we need. Now, if I were setting something up, I would have it capable of being locked from the inside of the classroom. If we don't have that and it would be expensive to replace, just keep your classroom doors closed and locked at all times. You know, for years, people said, I can't do that. Our operations would never allow that. Teachers would protest if that happened. But Tony, I remember growing up in the 70s when you could buy a car that didn't have seatbelts. But too many accidents later, it's the law. It's click it or ticket. It's buckle up for safety. And nobody complains today because we know it's the right thing. We're a short distance away from everybody keeping all classroom doors closed and locked. And I know it could hassle our convenience a little bit, but there's nobody who would ever willingly trade our security for our convenience.
Very good. And one other person just asked, and I'm not sure if this is possible or not, but they wanted to know if there's a downloadable copy of your presentation.
You know what? If you would send me an email to paul.timm, and that has two M's at it, paul.timm@allegion.com, I can send you the safety resources. I can't send the photos, as you can imagine, because they're from different schools that I've been to, but I'd be happy to send these to you. If you say, well, that sounds like a little bit of a hassle, now would be the time to take a photo of your screen. This is pretty much the key of what I can share. If one day Lightspeed said, oh, wait a minute, could you do a much pared down PowerPoint and send it to us without photos, I might be willing to do that. And then Tony, then they could come and get that from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Paul. Really appreciate your time and providing us this valuable information. For those of you on the webinar, just as a reminder, we will be providing a recording of this webinar to all registrants within the next couple of days. And I just wanted to thank you for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon.